Yeah, I gave birth to it at a artist residency at Deep Bay 15 years ago on September 9th. Ironically, the last day of this performance. So, yeah, I was interested in religion and mythology and in exploring art as a replacement for religion because I felt like, at this point, we've deconstructed religion as a grand narrative. We know how dangerous and problematic it is, but in its absence, we still hunger for ritual and communitas and gathering together. So I was interested in art as a replacement for religion, and then gradually it occurred to me, why don't I just create a religion as art? And that would also ask questions about the nature of religion, because religion is arguably art. It's the creativity and ingenuity of minds across thousands of years developing and creating a system of meaning. So then when I became interested in the idea of a religion as a virus, because it occurred to me that religion behaves virally. It spreads from person to person, but also from nation to nation. It's infectious, it's contagious. And religiosity itself is something it seems we're hardwired to be drawn to. So ironically, my audiences comprise of a lot of secular people or even atheists who had no intention of having a religious experience in my work, but then tell me I had a religious experience. And then I like to deconstruct, what does that mean? What is a religious experience, and what's the difference? But if you go see a powerful performance or a powerful, especially like a music concert, like those are religious experiences as well. I'm interested in sort of exploring that tension in that space of, what was religion before we identified how harmful and dangerous it was, and what can replace it. And I think that art is the ultimate response to that. Yeah, I started working at Graffiti Gallery. I think I was still in art school, and we provided regular art programming, and I think at that point it was over 20 satellite centers in the city. Basically every day of the week we were a safe place and a sanctuary that anyone who needed to could come in and make art. And also there was this very beautiful idea circulating that for marginal people or people in precarious positions, the identity of an artist is something that anyone can claim, and it's an empowering identity. And the fact that I am an artist, and as a queer artist, I'm inherently a survivor, I got to perform for these young people how art can save lives, how being an artist actually empowers you to help shape the culture you're in instead of being at the mercy of it. So I was so proud of the work that I did here, and I talk about it all the time still. I worked here for 10 years as an art instructor. But on top of that, Graffiti Gallery gave me the opportunity for regular employment that also allowed for me to go away to residencies for 4 months or projects. I could always come back and there was work. So I've said to many people, if it hadn't been for Graffiti Gallery, I don't know if I would have been able to rise to the summons that were happening in my art practice, because basically, as a performance artist, my body is needed to be present in every project, which means a lot of travel and I need a lot of support. And the fact that it was possible to do that and make money and make meaningful money, because the way I was being paid was to provide sanctuaries and to show the urgency of art to city councillors as well as to a public that sorely needs it. So this is a very beautiful opportunity for me to make a sanctuary and temple here, because it's here where I learned how to make sanctuaries and temples of art for those that need it. It was compelling. When I was in art school, I still remember it was Alex Prushnik's video class, and in my second year, and I had an existential dilemma. I thought my art could go one of two ways. It could either be political or mystical. And I felt that it needed to be political because of the reality that we inherit. But at the same time, I was always drawn to exploring and creating the mystical as a political act. And so doing my undergraduate at the University of Manitoba, that was the space where I was able to harmonize those two into one mission. But interestingly enough, a lot of professors and a lot of people of the old guard at that time said things like, oh, don't use spirituality in your work. It's a career killer. The art world doesn't like religion, doesn't like spirituality. But luckily Sharon Allward was a professor at the art school. Her whole practice was questioning religion and postmodernity. And she strongly encouraged that for me. But weirdly enough, because of what everyone said, I had basically accepted that if I wanted to be true to my art, that I would not really have a career. I just assumed I would be kind of like that nerdy, hermetic person who paints their entire apartment and a few people come to my shows. But then in my last year of art school, A.A. Bronson came to Winnipeg, and he was doing a show in New York called A.A. Bronson's School for Young Shamans. And we met, and he invited me to perform. I was the youngest artist in the show. There were 13 other very established queer artists exploring ritual, magic, and religion. And all of the warnings that people had given me before about this is the word, it's a career killer, suddenly I was in a massive sold-out show in a Chelsea gallery doing queer religion. And I got in the New York Times, and so then I came back and things were quite different. And I would say from that point on, I was very celebrated. I noticed in art school, when visiting artists came to speak, they had a very different perspective than some of the local teachers. And it was quite interesting to see certain artists here say things like, oh, I can't do this because everyone says I shouldn't. And then a visiting artist comes in and says, no, I think you should. A. Bronson said that to a number of people to contradict what the professors were saying. And I think that taught me that art is fundamentally about holding to your guns and trusting your instincts and developing them. And it's good to be challenged, and it's good to be warned about the realities that other people have experienced, but the urgency of art is actually following your own rhythm and trusting it. And so in the end, I ended up being sort of celebrated, and the question of spirituality in art now is huge, especially with Indigenous resurgence and the climate crisis, and and we're facing our own extinction. Those are these are places where religion and spirituality are urgently needed. So yeah, there was a time where what I was doing wasn't entirely comprehended here, and it took me being recognized from elsewhere for that to be celebrated. But in the end, I understand that that's actually a sort of a classic mythological motif, the hero quest. You have to depart the village and go have a very complex experience in the jungle and then come back, and then that becomes a legend. So in the end, the Manitoba Arts Council in particular, a lot of my early work, I got to work with Marina Abramovich on her solo retrospective at the MoMA. So many things were enabled by the Winnipeg and the Manitoba arts community that led me to become what I am. In a way, postmodernity was about the destruction of those codes. Yet at the same time, in my experience, and I've now shown my work in over 33 countries, and what I've learned is there are so many art worlds. There isn't one. And it's true that probably even 50 or 60 years ago, before the internet and everything, you had art meccas like New York or London or Paris, and those were the places that everyone flocked to. And we are primates. So primates group together and align and create their own clans. We inevitably do that. I think the combination of sort of the postmodernist breaking down of all of those systems and the rise of internet and the information age has led us to almost an ecology rather than a hierarchical system of schools. And what I've really come to learn, and a lot of the artists that I respect, you know, some of the time they're in museums, some of the time they're in DIY anarchist festivals, some of the time they're doing performances in secret only for their friends. And I try and operate that way as well. I'm interested in art moving across different cultural codes. And interestingly enough, when I was included in A.A. Bronson's School for Young Shamans, that was the beginning of a kind of school of queer shamanism, queer paganism, queer witches. Now that's a thing. I mean, there's many, and there's a lot of exhibitions and a lot of projects. There's been a lot of attention recently in the last decade to the return of the witch in contemporary culture and in contemporary art.